this is my first Sunday to actually speak up here. I'm a little verklempt. Let me take you all in for a second. You know, once upon a time there was a group of people kind of like you, and except these people lived under a glass dome. And if you can imagine living under a glass dome and then repopulating in that particular community, then all that you know is what exists under that glass dome. And then the stories began to evolve. The narrative of outside of the glass dome, everything was unsafe. It was treacherous. And in fact, if you even dared to venture outside of the glass dome, you would immediately disintegrate and die. A horrible, horrible death. And as this story began to be told generationally, of course, very few people even entertained the idea. And then they began to legislate under this glass dome. And some of that legislation said that even if your curiosity led you to go over to the edge of the glass dome and to lift it up and like smell or stick your foot out, you would be excommunicated and you would be forced out under the glass dome into that, where everyone in the safety under the dome would watch you have your perilous death. And thus they lived happily ever after. But there's always somebody, right? There's always one or two, right? We'll call them Romeo and Juliet, the love couple, the young beings that had not cultivated or developed a sense of cynicism like the rest of the people under the glass dome, and curiosity just took over. And they thought, well, maybe if we peek when everybody's asleep. But somehow I think some alarm system must have been instigated because, you know, in that early morning hour when they went and they lifted the glass dome and they kind of put their hands out to feel the temperature and put their feet out and tried to smell the smell, the alarm goes off and all of the community under the glass dome wakes and they find them. And what? There's been legislation, right? So what has to happen to the two young lovers? They have to be pushed out under the glass dome while everyone watches. And so they are. And everybody crowds around and they force them out and they push them out with such velocity that they trip and they stumble and they fall face down. And both of them, the young man and the young woman, are paralyzed because they're waiting for the inevitable. They're waiting for what it was that they told would happen to them once they're outside of this glass dome. And they waited. And their knuckles began to relax a little bit. And all of a sudden they began to take some deep breaths and they began to look at themselves. And in the meantime, everybody else is inside the glass dome, pressing out, looking at them, waiting for the destruction, which doesn't come. And all of a sudden, this young man and this young woman began to stand up. And, you know, they began to smell things that they hadn't smelled before, like lilac and jasmine blooming. They began to see and sense and touch green grass, which obviously didn't exist under the glass dome. They began to feel, for the first time, the wind against their skin. And all of these sensory things began to evoke within them such a semblance of joy that the young man and the young woman began to dance and throw their arms up and wave them like they just don't care. And they were having such bliss. And guess what everybody in the glass dome was doing? They were looking at them going, WTF, what? Just like, what? And it was so upsetting. It was so upsetting to them to have such egregious acts thrown blatantly in front of them that someone went and got a bucket of black paint. And someone else went and got multiple brushes. And those who were next to the glass began to take them and began to paint from the bottom up in big black swatches in order to block the view of the young man and the young woman. And they began to paint as high as their arms could reach so that they wouldn't have to see such a spectacle. And they began to go in the circular form of the glass globe and paint feverishly and feverishly. And of course, the young man and the young woman were so excited and wanted to communicate. They kept running around the circumference. So they kept having to paint until everything around them from as high as they could reach was black. And everybody inside the glass dome went, now we can go on to living. We all live in glass domes. You know, those glass domes are the collections of all of the beliefs of safety and sometimes they're well-meaning, but a lot of times what they are is they're just generational regurgitation of limitation and lack. And so we inherit the fears of our parents. And if there's not what I love to call a divine disruption, then what we do is we invest in more black paint and more brushes. And we keep reinforcing those false ideas so that we don't really have to face the unknown. So that we don't have to look at something that's disruptive or uncomfortable or unusual or different from how we have become accustomed. And what I've discovered so many years is that this philosophy is a disruption philosophy. That all of the greatest spiritual teachers were disruptors. You know, Jesus was a conscientious disruptor. You know, this Sunday, Palm Sunday, I grew up in a Judeo-Christian regular background. Palm Sunday was a big deal. As a child, I actually got my own palm frond. You come in. Did y'all do that? Anybody else do that? You come in, Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna. But what you really don't understand as a child is that the people who were saying Hosanna on Palm Sunday were the same people who on Thursday were the voices that were convicting and participating in the condemnation of this conscientious disruptor so that he could become arrested. So then by Friday, he could be executed or crucified. And then by Sunday, the traditional Easter, we have the example of not being bound by limitation and by being in the body. That which is the master teacher, Jesus, was the person that eked out of the glass dome. And there are those of you who sit in this room who have stepped outside of the glass dome. And there are people in your lives who continue to paint things in front of you and tell you that you're wrong and condemn you. Mm-hmm. I hear it. This is my amen corner over here. Mm-hmm. 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 And so what does it take to become a conscientious disruptor? Because actually, it's what you're designed to be. You are designed to be someone that doesn't accept at face value what people tell you or what is being handed down to you, but you are designed to question. You are designed to grow. You are designed to expand. You're not designed to accept limitations simply because generationally or even culturally, that's what's been handed down to you. And there are so many ways in which we have been instructed to do that. And one of the ways in which I've subscribed to, I'm disrupting a little bit. Some of the ways in which we interpret the science of mind teaching when we hear things about turning away from the condition. When you hear that phrase, turn away from the condition, what comes to mind for you? Turn away from the effect. Turn away from the lack and limitation. Turn away from it in order that you might clear your head and be able to establish in mind a new cause or a new choice. Because if I don't turn away from that habit, if I don't turn away from it, then I don't give myself the liberty to create and choose something new. But I'm disrupting that a little bit. Because I realize that for me, I will just clarify it that way, for me, It is impossible for me to turn away from something and forget about it unless I have spiritual amnesia. But I don't. I remember. I remember what happened. I remember that pain. I remember that effect. I remember what it is that I saw. And it doesn't serve me to actually turn away from the condition without bringing the condition with me in order to transmute it into a new experience, into a new power, into actually a tool and actually something that is going to elevate and help me be relatable to all of the other people who had the same condition. And so for me, what that is transmutation. What that is taking something and creating spiritual alchemy with it. I take the thing and I turn the thing into what? Into gold. I take the mishap, I take the pain, but instead of being identified solely with the pain, like there's a period at the end of it, I take the pain and I create this alchemical reaction to it so that the pain actually becomes one of the most powerful tools that I possess, because now I use it in a positive and an expansive way. So remember I'm being biblical because it's almost Easter and I have to be that. In the book of John, there was this paralyzed man, and Jesus was doing his thing. He was teaching, and he came upon this cripple, this paralyzed man who was on a mat, and he spoke to the man and he said, "Why don't you enter into the bath? Why don't you enter into the pool, the cleansing pool?" And the man said, "I can't, because I'm crippled. I've been this way for 38 years. And he said, every time I try to crawl towards that, everybody else rushes in front of me and they get in and I can't get in." And that was the man's story. That was the man's pain. That was the man inside the glass dome. That was his identification. And in that moment, what the master teacher Jesus did was he disrupted that. He disrupted a 38-year experience in a moment. And he said to him, "Take up your bed and walk." He didn't say, "Gosh, I'm so sorry. Let me get down with you and let me adjust your pillow and let me try to make this experience as comfortable as possible." No, he made a demandment upon law, which put into motion a healing action, and he said, "I want you to take your bed." He didn't say, "Leave your bed." Isn't that fascinating? He didn't say, "Leave your bed and get on out of here." He said, "Take up your bed and walk." So in other words, take the thing that you have been so self-identified with, but start to move. Take an action with that. And so this morning, what I want us to look at is, what is it about us? What is it that we can carry into us that will become potent, that will become alchemical, that will be the necessary thing for you to do what it is that you are designed to do in your circle of influence? Because to say, take up your bed and walk, is probably one of the most compassionate things. It isn't compassionate to get down and enable in that particular moment and leave them there in that self-identification. It isn't compassionate for us to offer our thoughts and prayers and then to not take an action. You know, it's called the season for peace and nonviolence, but nonviolence alone wasn't the definitive definition. It was direct action, nonviolent direct action. And so what is our direct action as a community? What is our direct action in living affirmatively, individually in your day-to-day life, and collectively as a group? What is our direct action as a nation? What is our direct action in the world? Because you see, if we don't begin to examine those things, we are no better than the people who live under that glass dome. In fact, we're probably the ones who are reinforcing the black paint and continuing to be in that level of denial. And so we fold this in innumerable ways. So I want you to think about what makes you uncomfortable. What makes you uncomfortable? What is your pain point? What is that particular thing within your body? I'm so proud of this community. I'm so joyous that Karen Ratz is the president of our board. We had our first board meeting. We had our first board meeting this week, and I remember some of it because I was jet lagged, but the thing that really stuck out for me was that she passed a motion that this community, for the first time since we could remember, for the first time, we will tithe the full 10% regardless of what our monthly income is. Regardless of what our monthly income is. How many of you have ever participated in tithing, but then things happen and you go, I'm going to postpone that a little bit. I'm going to give when my resource comes back. Now, Karen said, I want to pass a motion that we do that as a community, because if we've never done that, if we've never fully committed in long-term commitment to that, then we're not practicing what it is that we preach. And she called it out. She was a conscientious disruptor. And you could feel everybody in the room be a little bit nervous and look at go, who voted her in? But you know what? She's a smooth talker. And she got everyone to agree, and it passed. And so I wanted to share that with you this morning because I want to say to you, look out and watch what happens. Watch what happens with this community now. When we stay faithful to that, when we stay faithful to the disruption of moving away from luxuriating in the pain, but taking the pain and letting it be used for something greater. You know, when Jesus was making his way into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, he knew what was going to happen, right? He wasn't taken by surprise. He knew exactly what he was set up for. And then he did what? He did it anyway. He did it anyway. The story is unveiled to us in that he already understood what was going to be that crucifixion experience. And he knew that because of that and because of his willing participation to move and to walk into that, that some big monumental shift and change would happen. How many of you know that things might be a little bit messy, and yet you're still willing to walk into that? How many of you know that you're living under various versions of glass domes, but yet you're still willing to honor that which is, some people would call it naivete, but actually it's a sense of allowing within you. And you're willing to move into that which is uncomfortable because you know the greater good is on the other side of that. You know the greater good is on the other side of that. And so 3 of us were in India, and the nonprofit that I have established, we opened up some new school initiatives, and it's nothing like the schools in Cambodia. This is far more opportunistic. And Nikki Murphy and Ian Folker were with me. And our main school is in a town called Bodh Gaya, which is a very unusual little town or small city in India. And its distinction is this: it is the birthplace of Buddhism. It is where the Bodhi tree is. It is where Siddhartha sat under that tree and gained enlightenment. And so here is this small town, which is the birth of Buddhism, in this massive Hindu country. And Buddhists from all over the world come to Bodh Gaya. They come to do the pilgrimage. There are like stations of the cross in Judeo-Christianity. There are stations of the Buddha. and his enlightening and his journey in Bodh Gaya and in the outskirts, in the regions of Bodh Gaya. And one of those stations is a cave, and it's called the Progbati Cave. And it is where he lived for 7 years as an ascetic. If you don't know what an ascetic is, it is someone who gives complete renunciation and has resigned themselves to suffer for enlightenment. So Siddhartha thought that this was the path, this is what you needed to do. He hungered for enlightenment. He had been born of privilege, and when he stepped outside, if you know the story, he saw pain and suffering for the first time, and it was so traumatic for him that he devoted his life to be able to find a way to pacify or to soothe that pain. And so one of the approaches was, well, let me go suffer. So he went and hung out with the ascetics, and he lived in this cave for 7 years, and he subsisted on things like a few grains of rice. And I don't know what happened on that one day after 7 years, but he went, screw this, I'm out of here. But the cave is there, right? And so when all of the images of the Buddha, usually you see the big belly and you see all the different mudras and you see all the different designs that indicate, well, in that cave there is a Buddha statue and it's skeletal. The ribs are showing and the suffering is on its face. And so that's one of the stations of the Buddha's journey. And so I said to Nikki and Ian, do you want to go? Do you want to see it? And they were like, yeah. And I said, okay. And I told them how you had to avoid the crowds, because at any moment a busload from Sri Lanka might show up and then you would never get near the cave. I said, so we have to leave at 5:30 in the morning. And we have to go, and then we have to climb up halfway up this mountain, and we go through this monastery, and then there's the cave. And I said, and if we're lucky and if we leave on time, we might have it to ourselves for about 20 or 30 minutes. So they were game, and we were ready, and we left very early that morning. And then as we were going, I said, and let me add a little bit of a warning to you. Did you ever see that movie with Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn where death becomes her? And they drink the elixir, and as they drink the elixir, then Isabella Rossellini goes, and now a warning. And Meryl Streep goes, now a warning? So we're on our way, and I go, so let me just give you a little warning here. Then you go, then what? And I said, what you're going to witness on the way, I said, we'll avoid some of it because it'll be early, but what you're going to witness on the way back will be the panorama of the Indian experience and all of its suffering and all of its disease and all of its extreme poverty and begging. And I said, so I just want to give that to you. So we go, and we actually do get into the cave, and we have a few minutes by ourselves, and it's really beautiful. And a monk comes in, and he washes the statue, and he redresses the statue. And we're in there, and it's just wonderful. And all of a sudden, this roar, and we crawl out of the cave, and there are hundreds of people there that didn't exist 20 minutes ago. And we sat, and we did the chanting, and we watched, and we observed, and it was really beautiful. And then it was time to come down. And sure enough, there they all were. And the begging is so intense, and the polio and the disfigurement and the limbs that no longer work, that they drag themselves through the gravel and through the dirt, and the pads of their skin are so worn down from years and years of that level of begging. And you go, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? Do you just keep walking and ignore it? Or do you allow yourself to find some hybrid of balance, and you begin to breathe, and you begin to understand, and you contemplate, what does oneness mean, and what is this spiritual journey all about, and how do I reconcile my science of mind teaching that says we create our reality? How did these people create their reality? And all of those big, fundamental, monumental, big life questions that always happen to those of us who have taken class before. And people say, well, what about the Holocaust? And what about birth defects? And what about all of these things? How do you just answer those things away in a way that rationalizes a philosophy that says your thoughts create your reality? How do you do that when someone's grabbing at your leg and screaming and begging? How do you do that? And what I've come to recognize is that I don't know what I don't know. I know some things, but there's a lot that I don't know. And how foolish and how out of integrity it would be for any teacher or any student to profess and to say, I know it all, and to create legislation that says, I know it all. When in point of fact, there are things outside of our glass dome that you and I have yet to experience. But how do we get closer to the realization of knowing? What do you think the first step is? We have to disrupt what is right now. We have to disrupt what is comfortable. We have to disrupt the tendency to turn away from that condition because the condition is inconvenient. But to rather turn towards it and say, what can I do to think a bigger thought? That's the title, so I have to use the Think Big title because otherwise Stacy will be mad at me. But what do I do? What do I do to create a larger, a bigger idea arena of thought rather than just unconsciously walking through and always picking what's convenient? I love Dr. Michelle, my vet right there. I love you. And you know why I love you? Because you do what is so inconvenient every single day. Can you imagine being a vet and having to put the most precious commodity that people love down? And to have that be a normal act almost every week, right? That's being a walking and a breathing alchemical healer. To do something so uncomfortable and yet to do it. And I'm sure there are times when you said, what profession have I chosen? Yes. Yeah. And so this isn't about prosperity consciousness. It isn't about making the bad go away. It's about what do you and I do in integrity to become change agents in a world that craves and hungers for what it is that you can offer and give. Are you willing to ride into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey and have people praise you, knowing the fickle nature of those people is going to turn right back around? How many of you are willing to love again when your heart's been broken and you build a protective cage around you and say, well, I'm not going to let that happen again? How many of you are willing to risk and put yourself out there for a creative idea, knowing that the other creative ideas that you have ventured forth and tried didn't quite pan out the way that you wanted them to? So without you realizing it, you've built a glass dome around you. And anytime anyone comes up to you with a new idea, you get out your metaphoric black paint and you go, oh, that sounds really nice. And you just paint away. How many of us are willing to live in that particular way? All of the children that are in our schools are in the lowest caste system in India is the untouchables. They are the ones that deal with the dead bodies and the cremation. and sewage and things like that. And then right above the untouchables is the lower caste. The lower caste has several divisions, but here is the long-standing rule in India, that if you were born in this lower caste, you could not go outside during certain hours of the day, because those hours were reserved for the Brahmin, who are at the top of the caste. You couldn't go shopping. You were not allowed to learn how to read or to write or to gain any kind of education, because that would be disrupting the rules. That would be moving outside of the glass dome, and you had to stay within the parameters of what you were born into. Now, they say today that the caste system is no longer valid, but you know, the mindset is still there, right? How many of you left your home and you said, oh, I'm never going to do that again, but all of that's still there? Oh, I ran from First Assemblies of God in Beaumont, Texas. I ran, saying I'd never have anything to do with God again, but ooh, it was all still in there, right? And so when you leave that particular mindset, there has to be something within us that becomes a conscientious disruptor. We have this amazing young man. His name is Nandu. He is my administrator. And within 1 year's time, he has put together a fabulous after-school program in Bodh Gaya. And then about an hour's drive, there's a village called Lakhanpur, where we are also starting a school, and the kids are meeting in a cow barn. And there is cow dung all over the walls, and the flies are everywhere. And God loved Nikki and Ian, who were there teaching and supporting and passing out food supplies, and the flies are just all over us, and they didn't complain once. And here they are getting an education, which technically would be illegal a while ago. So Nandu, conscientious disruptor, he is my administrator. He is from the lower caste, and he went and he got himself an education. He saved his rupees, and he paid, and he got a master's degree on his own without anyone's help. And his sole intention for doing that was to take the pain of his lower caste experience, of that of his family, of his parents, and of his grandparents, and to be able to take it and alchemicalize that in order to assure that these children in this lower caste would someday have an education. That's why I picked him, because I knew where his heart was. And he wasn't willing to allow the perpetuation of that. Now here's the amazing thing. In Bodh Gaya, we're in these classrooms. These kids are so smart. They are rattling off fractions, and I didn't even raise my hand because I didn't know the answer. They are doing ascending and descending math, and they're just calling it out, both girls and boys, and they're like boom, 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 boom. And I went back to my room that night, and I was thinking about particularly the girls in this classroom, and it dawned on me, what are they going to do with this? Because unless they live in a major city, there are no jobs. There's nothing in Bodh Gaya that is for a young girl to pursue. The restaurants, men. The hotels, all staffed with men. Because culturally, they either have to be home cooking or they can't be left alone with men, because that's not acceptable in the Hindu culture. So I'm thinking about this, and I come up with some ideas. Later on in the journey, I meet with an Indian businessman who asked me what I'm doing, and I explained to him a little bit about my ideas, and he goes, oh, that won't happen. Can't happen. And he starts to give me the litany of all the reasons why that wasn't feasible and all the reasons why I would be wasting my time. And I respectfully listened and respectfully debated, but I left that meeting going, wow, I'm so glad I'm naive. I'm so glad that all those years ago, in my naivete, that I decided to ride in on the donkey, knowing that I was going to mess up, knowing that it wasn't going to be perfect, but realizing that somewhere along the journey, something had to change and shift and happen. And I looked at Nikki and I said, wow, if we weren't able to listen past that, we wouldn't even be here. And she said, I know. And so I want to offer you today the understanding that all of us, we are marching, just like yesterday, what happened. But you realize that what happened yesterday is not enough, right? Because there are still divisions of our society that are going to have to march, that haven't marched yet. They're called men. They're called white men. They're called white straight men, thank you. They're just called men. But it has to be the thing, the ones who have profited the most. And so I don't just leave it there, but I want you also to look at, if you use that as a metaphor, where have you profited off of your limitation? Where have you profited off of your story? And are you willing to march outside of the glass dome into an experience that's going to be uncomfortable? Where are you going to create your own circle of influence that isn't in allegiance with how you've played small before, but is championing you to do something beyond what is normal? And I believe that a new Genesis, not perhaps the original Genesis, but the new Genesis of possibility sits within this very room. It sits within you and I being willing to take personal inventory and to not become addicted to the palm fronds. To not become addicted to the convenience, but to be able to look at that suffering. To be able to look at all of that and to take it in. So there is a Buddhist meditation, and maybe sometime we'll do it. Not today, but it's called the Tonglen meditation. And you know what the Buddhist Tonglen meditation is about? Instead of just meditating and breathing in, you consciously take in the pain. And you breathe through the pain, and you transmute the pain, and then what you give back is the peace and the harmony. So you're not denying the existence of the pain, but you're actually being a transmuter. I want you to consider that this week in whatever form or practice it is that you do, to not look away from what is uncomfortable, but to turn around and to look at the condition, recognizing that that's exactly what it is, a condition, and that all conditions can be shifted. All conditions can be shifted. All glass bubbles, glass domes of existence can be stepped out of. The true question is that what you want to do? Is that what you want to do? I ask you to close your eyes and breathe this morning. I'm kind of a big fan of this. I want you to take the hand of the person next to you. See if you can become still enough to feel the pulse that is happening within their own hand. I want you to know that there is pain in that pulse. There is sorrow in that pulse. There is fear in that pulse. It's neither good nor bad. It's not to be judged. It's just to be observed. And if you would consider inviting that pain in from the sole perspective of offering it love and healing. You don't need to know the circumstance or the details or the names. All that is required is that your intention be pure. And your intention is to take it outside of the glass bubble, and to let it breathe. And in your own form and fashion, offer up a little prayer that sounds something like, I take this sacred pain and I allow it to be transmuted and rebirthed into beauty. I take this pain and I allow it to breathe and to experience divine healing, so that it no longer creates a prison or a confinement, but it becomes the doorway of liberation. I take this pain and I love it. I love it to wholeness. And then I want you to send that back to them through the pulsation of their hand, the sensation of what it is, the skin that you are holding. I want you to physically send back to them not the same thing, but wholeness and love. Understanding that what has just happened is that you have just simply helped heal your own pain. Squeeze that hand in recognition. Gently open your eyes, and without saying anything, just look at them, letting them know that you have shared that experience with them. May this week be filled with conscientious disruption. And so it is.
Hi, I'm David Ault, and I simply want to say thanks. Thanks for taking the time to watch our broadcast here at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. We have a vision, and that vision is to reawaken all to their spiritual magnificence. And one of the ways that we are able to do that is through this very medium of broadcasting. So if you got anything out of this, if you felt in any way inspired, or if something spoke to you directly, then I extend an invitation to you to become a part of our family by donating. And there are many ways in order for you to be able to do that. One is to simply go to our website at slca.com, and there you will find all different kinds of prompts that will help you support what it is that we are doing here in Atlanta. One way is to become a pledger. That means that you decide on a monthly basis that you are going to help us with this vision. Another way is to donate through our management system called Fellowship One, another through PayPal, and another even easier way is on your cell phone. You can do what's called text to tithe, and that number is 404-796-7030. Again, thank you so much for your support, and I invite you to come back weekly to see what it is that we're up to. Blessings.